manufacturers, marketeers, retailers, packaging technologies and materials science all combine to continue to drive a global economy with a changing nature of waste and an ever-proliferating range and forms of materials and composites that our sector has to respond to. Undoubtedly, we've made progress collectively in linking with the retailers, the pack techers, the marketeers and the policymakers, but we're still arguably at a rudimentary level in terms of true waste reduction designed for recycling and designing out waste. And even when it comes to on-pack labelling and convenient and consistent collections or simpler recycling to help the punters do the right thing. However, despite long periods of policy vacuum, bursts of political interest followed by uncertainty and delay, we continue to invest, to innovate, to nudge the supply chain and to quietly deliver and improve world-class services, because this is what we do. And there's more we can do. We should, of course, make sure we focus relentlessly on the growing risks of waste crime. This continues to be an attractive prospect to criminals looking to make a quick and substantial buck, with the cost of waste crime currently running at close to £1 billion. That's £924 million lost to our economy every year, and that's up a concerning 50% over the past 5 years. We have to continue to press for more resources, better regulation, to plug the gaps and focused and coordinated enforcement capacity to reverse this worrying trend. We also have to acknowledge that we still require, and we're pleased to see it happening now, the full implementation of the current collection and packaging reforms to continue to improve environmental and societal outcomes and close the gap between packaging producers meeting the true costs of recycling their products. And there was a recent, the Audit Committee and the National Infrastructure Committee, National Infrastructure Commission reports that both clearly stated the need for government to integrate the implementation of the raft of policy measures that I'll come on to. The combined package of regulatory reform that came from the latest waste and resources strategy, including plastic packaging tax already in, extended producer responsibility and simpler recycling coming now being implemented, supported by electronic waste tracking and new carriers, brokers and dealers regulations, and all underpinned by the landfill tax and forthcoming emissions trading scheme, and possibly a deposit return scheme, but let's get the timing and the priorities right, all add up to potentially world-leading regulations. Some dithering and delay has been inevitable for such a groundbreaking approach, but we should all do everything possible to ensure and encourage the UK government and the devolved administrations to continue with the delivery on that in an integrated fashion with the benefits that will follow. So the case studies here that you see on the screen, again, give a flavour of some of the stuff going on across the sector, from HypnoCat, the weird pink creature in the top left-hand corner, which was a campaign to encourage us all to recycle more of our household small electronic goods. In the bottom left, that's Miller Hill, where FCC are working with local authorities on heat delivery from energy recovery plants. And again, the bottom right, a plastics recovery facility designed and built by Viridor, the biggest and arguably the most advanced, although Berryman recycling we also highlight in the report, to recycle and recover more and more polymers from the waste stream. So in a world where communications and how we consume information has moved on apace, I'm pleased that this year's presidential report takes a different tack. We've gone digital-led to shine a light on what we do and on what world-class services and circular economy pathfinders look like. In itself, it's been an interesting process. When offered the opportunity to showcase themselves in a short, sharp and engaging way, some in the sector have been fairly slow and shy to do so. To a degree, much of the sector does what it's always done, getting on with business in a defensive and fairly conservative way, which has previously been good enough for many. But if we want a new generation of resource managers and new champions, we'll need to get on the front foot and engage and get our points across in a different way. We need new voices speaking together and not against each other, clear messages, and to exploit the amazing new channels of communication that can reach far wider audiences if formatted and smartly tuned in. Excellence in communications and engagement will help us move towards what we want to be doing, a highly skilled workforce delivering resource security and carbon efficiency, engaged customers using convenient services backed up by smart and enforced regulation. So I encourage you to check out the content. It's far from perfect, but it shines a light on some of the best facets and services of our sector and CIWM's members. I was personally delighted to highlight the Sherborne Resource Park in Coventry, where I started my career in this fantastic sector, even though that was where I also came second in an interview to become COV's first recycling officer, but that's another story. I'm also pleased to showcase the fabulous Suez Renew Hub in Greater Manchester, which is similar to the Coventry Council-supported Community Recycling of Waste, or CROW scheme, that I worked on all those years ago. But instead of being hidden away in a back corner of an industrial estate, it's now at scale and very much public-facing. Brilliant work and social value. This is what we do. So I hope you'll be able to engage and enjoy some of the best that our sector has to offer. And hopefully it will inspire others to do the same. And as well as this report showcasing the world-class stuff we do, look out in the coming months for more exciting plans that the CIWM has to accelerate the success of circular economy pathfinders and the innovators out there, by offering more communications and engagement support as we continue to drive towards that world beyond waste. So now I'm going to just go a little drier and more technical, because IOSH asked for an update on the big picture stuff that's happening and transition within our sector. And as it says on the screen, ours is a sector in transition. And that's driven largely by the waste resource strategies of England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, which in turn have come from and are driven by the 25-year environment plan, which again in itself informed the Environment Plan 2021, arguably one of the most important bits of legislation for our sector since the Environmental Protection Act of 1990. And that combined has led to the Office for Environmental Protection and the Environmental Improvement Plans, which set high-level targets for our sector in terms of waste prevention, recycling levels, and resource efficiency. And from that, and from the EPA, the Environment Act, which I'll come on to on the next slide, a series of waste reforms, some of which I've mentioned already, which are now, we're pleased to say, in play and will continue to challenge our sector and to change the way we all have to deal with waste, whether at business or household level. We also have new and increased taxing, the plastics packaging tax, the landfill tax, etc. And importantly, and arguably as much of a game changer to the sector as the landfill tax was back in 1990, the emissions trading scheme, which as government has now made very clear will now apply to energy from waste plants from the year 2028. And that will drive a whole new set of activity and behaviours. And all of those contain guidance. So the Environment Act itself had clear aims, which you can see there. Arguably for our sector, the most relevant being the better use of resources at the bottom, but we plug in and key into all of these top level aims and sections of the Environment Act. But part 3, waste and resource efficiency, has clear enabling regulation, which are now coming into secondary legislation and being introduced on producer responsibility, resource efficiency, managing waste better, and waste enforcement. And in terms of some of the regulatory drivers now in play, these are they. And I won't go into any detail with you. We can obviously discuss them in the Q&A if we wish to. But extended producer responsibility, again, arguably a game changer. This makes the producers of materials responsible from cradle to grave and have to put money into the system to pay local authorities to be able to collect, reprocess and recycle the materials that they're putting onto the market. And the mechanisms are now being set up, and the data gathering on those that will be responsible is now in play. Simpler recycling, relabeled from consistent collections recently by Rishi Sunak, which again we can discuss in Q&A, but we're pleased to see it. This will make it simple for households to know what and when they can recycle and get consistent recycling schemes across the whole of England and hopefully the rest of the UK. Deposit return schemes, electronic waste tracking, and I've mentioned the emissions trading scheme, which really will be a game changer. And again, the industry has now got a whole series of working groups looking at the complications of what that will mean. Where do we measure the emissions? How do we ensure accuracy? Who will enforce it? And most importantly, what are the practical measures to divert the fossil fuel based wastes, the plastics, the films, the packaging, from energy schemes, which is what that is designed to do to reduce carbon yet further and aim towards net zero. Budget and finance bills will continue to see increases in landfill tax and plastics packaging tax, both of which continue to squeeze and change behaviour in the sector. And we've got a whole series of waste crime measures, which, as I mentioned in the main report, is absolutely vital, given that waste crime levels are still at record highs. And we're just seeing consultation. There's a live consultation on extended producer responsibility for small electrical items, which is in play as we speak. And then lastly, just a flavour for some of the other drivers that continue with our sector, as indeed they will with sectors that you guys are working in. Everything from increasing costs, energy costs especially, that has pros and cons to a sector that generates large amounts of energy, and changes parts of our sector where people were paying for green waste to feed the AD plants because of the electricity prices over the last couple of years. That adds to fluctuations in the market, which we have to take in our stride. Environmental awareness from customers, from businesses, circular business models, which we're doing all that we can to encourage. And I'm really pleased to back up the announcement that some may have seen that CIWM has recently acquired the Circular Economy Institute and the Circular Economy Club, both global organizations bringing together circular economy innovators and looking at how we can drive and accelerate the move to a more circular economy and greater resource efficiency. Artificial intelligence, automation, you can read the rest of the list, but all of these things are pressures that are on our sector and that will change the nature of the services that we continue to deliver. I'm loath to play this last case study because I think what will happen last time will happen again and you won't be able to hear the scene. But this last case study is from Veolia in the Queen's funeral and the cleanup operation that had to take place, as well as the street management that Veolia were engaged with, and all the innovative kit, including electric collection vehicles and a whole range of other things that they deployed during that absolutely important event when the eyes of the world were upon London and the UK. I would urge you to have a look online at some of these case studies. Not all of them are videos, some of them are tiles, but they will give you a real good flavour for the best in the world-class services that our sector produces. Oh. So I'm pleased to have been able to showcase in the presidential report the world-class services that our sector continues to deliver. We will continue, and we're continuing to encourage members and businesses across the CIWM network to submit further case studies so that we can add to the portfolio to show what good looks like. And as I mentioned, we're currently engaged in a scheme where we've secured reserves funding to support circular economy innovators in the communications and engagement that they do to accelerate their own businesses. So we are supporting the innovation strategy, innovation pillar of CIWM strategy through a practical project that is about to hit the headlines. So I'd like to thank everybody that was involved in the production of the report, but also I'd like to commend you guys to dip into the report, see where it's relevant to you. And I think I'll wrap up there and hand over to or open up for Q&A, but hopefully that's given you a taste for what's happening across what we continue to consider to be a world-class sector.
Thank you very much indeed, Dan. I'm going to looking at the picture, various pictures and the things you were covering. I keep considering this word technology. Many health and safety people, to be of value, need to understand how things work around them. So we're not talking about just compliance and a piece of paper ticking a box. It's going in somewhere and to understand what it's doing, how it's working, and the effect it has on people. Would you say it's the same skill set and knowledge for a chartered waste person as well? The same level of knowledge is required, the same approach?
So our sector, like many, there is a huge range of the types of waste facilities. Some are as basic as a shed with a tipping floor and a shovel, and that continues to be a vital part of what we do. But some of the technology, as I've mentioned, in some of the material recycling facilities, the polymer plants, the energy plants, is pretty incredible in terms of what it can do. And our members have to stay on top of it. And if I understand your question, David, yeah, what we've got to do, the same technology and the same detailed understanding. So what the skills that our sector was looking for 10 years ago are completely different to a lot of the skills we're looking for now. We are looking for electrical engineers. We are looking for more and more process production managers, etc., etc. So, and we're competing against other sectors that often can pay more due to the economics. So the energy sector, direct competitor for some of the skills and the people that we want to attract. So absolutely vital part of the challenges of the sector at the moment.
The reason I ask that is the concept of best available technology is embedded in environmental legislation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's back to the same thing for health and safety people. Unless you know, is there something, avoid risk at source by, can you do it a different way? Is there something better? We have to stay a bridge of our technologies. We have to understand what's going on. We have to get out and look at things and read and engage. It's the same skill set as I think a 21st century professional.
Indeed, and best available technology is, yeah, demonstrating that is a constant challenge. But to show you how far our sector's come on, when I first joined Viridor, which was 25 years ago or so, some of the technology we were using in recycling plants was readapted potato sorting kit, which were mechanical sorting measures to try and sort post-consumer waste. Now we're using visual recognition technology, laser technology, and the most incredible and fairly sophisticated stuff. And now there is a mini sector that is designing kit and technology specifically for the waste sector, because we recognize how important it is, not just to the UK, but this is stuff that can be exported around the world. So vital we stay abreast and often ahead.
I mean, the last time I visited the materials reclamation facility down at Edmonton in North London, it was Biffa, a stroke. And I noticed that, talking about how they maintain it, that the technology is designed as such that they can replace any component in their system inside a shift. They've got bespoke replacements put together. They've designed in the best things, and they designed the way of doing something. We're looking at both things. I think my second question I want to pick in, that you talk about the waste sector. It's a bit like the health and safety sector, or the broader idea of sustainability. It's everybody's sector. Or everybody throughout the whole, from the supply chain, the consumer chain, to what organizations produce. It's everybody. It's a massive opportunity, isn't it?
It is indeed. And what we often say is the waste sector considers itself the fourth utility. It's something that affects every individual and every business in the UK. Wherever you are, you produce materials. And again, recycling is one of the positive environmental actions that everybody can take. And that's why there is such an awareness, such a drive to continue to raise those levels, and a bit of a worry that England's recycling rate, and indeed recycling rates across many parts of Europe, have stalled over the past few years. COVID was an obvious challenge to all of us, but other challenges remain. But yeah, it touches everybody. It's vitally important that we continue to make progress and make things, and that's why I focus on communications in the sector, because we need to continue to tell our stories stronger, to make people realize, both at home and work, why their actions do and can help drive greater resource efficiency.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions now from delegates here, and there's two questions in one here. Does the CIWM have any role to play in carbon reduction? If yes, how are we strategically playing the roles? And that goes on to, can you give it more light onto strategic emissions trading?
Yeah, okay, so
two questions in one there.
Simple question to the first one. Yes, we do. So at the moment, and I can't remember the exact tonnages, but it's on the highlight graphic of the report at the front end. We have reduced our carbon emissions as a sector by, I think it's either the largest or second largest of any sector, and it's something like 58% reduction, possibly more, over the last 10, 20 years. However, we still produce around 8% of all UK carbon emissions. And it's weird because some people look at the government figures, still say we produce around 4 to 5%, but the actual figure is 8 because some of that, the extra 3 to 4%, is buried within the energy from waste sector, and they're counted separately. I was chair of the ESA's Carbon Net Zero Working Group, and ESA, which is the trade body of the sector, has produced a very clear roadmap to net zero and a net zero carbon reduction plan. So we have identified where the biggest carbon emissions are, what the carbon reduction opportunities are, and what is needed to get from A to B and work towards net zero. And some of them are pretty obvious. So recycling has a major carbon reduction gain. So the more recycling we can do, the better it is from a resource and a net zero carbon reduction point of view. But there are some obvious big challenges, which takes me to the second part of the question, like how do we get plastics and plastic waste out of the fleet of energy from waste plants that the UK has built and is now operating, has built over the last 10, 15 years. Because that's fossil fuel. So plastic going into an energy plant is like a coal-fired power station, right, or a gas-fired power station, and it is somewhere in between in its emission levels. And whereas its first purpose is to safely treat and dispose of waste, it's still producing carbon out of the chimney. So the big drive now, and the emissions trading scheme will begin to set targets and to add costs onto the operations unless the sector can begin to divert more and more of that plastic waste out. So that's the big opportunity. ESA has a net zero carbon reduction plan. CIWM itself is a relatively small professional body. Its own carbon footprint is minuscule, but we have a plan to get to net zero, and we've made substantial progress in that as well. And we are working with CIWM and others to see how we can support the drive towards net zero across the sector. So more details can be provided, but yes, to both. You're on mute, David.
Where does the CIWM sit with regard to the use of plastics, given there is much scientific evidence that plastics pose less of an environmental risk than other forms and volumes of waste?
So
do you agree with the question?
Well, it's an interesting question in what it's saying. If I understand it right, so plastic as a packaging has massive advantages, and that's why it has proliferated, exploded over the last 30, 40 years. It protects many products. It helps us transport products across the world. It helps save or extend shelf life of products, and arguably reduces large amounts of food waste, which themselves would contribute to carbon or atmospheric carbon if allowed to rot down and get wasted. So it is a fantastic product. And as we move away from petrol and combustion engines to more electric vehicles, oil arguably will or could become cheaper, and therefore the drivers to move away from plastic as a packaging material is complicated. However, plastic is clearly a fossil fuel, so unless we can recycle it, and we are doing all that we can to encourage polymer recycling, less composite material design in recycling into plastic products, which enables the sector to recover and recycle more of it, because recycling it is a good thing and plastic is a good product to be able to recycle several, if not many times before it reaches the end of the road. So yeah, it has its pros and cons, but it is a fossil fuel. So unless we're recycling it, it's a fossil fuel at the moment going into energy. I'm really interested personally, and there are sector groups looking at it as to how we can replace plastic packaging with biodegradable or plant-based materials, and there are lots of exciting innovations coming onto the market which might see that proliferate in the coming years.
leads into Jeff's question about what pressure can CIWM apply, or I think follow up, what are you doing? What are you applying to producers to change the way they design products and packaging to reduce waste in the first instance, or make reuse recycling more straightforward? You've part answered that in the last question, but do you want anything you want to expand on?
Well, so waste prevention is a massive challenge. What are we doing? There are lots of organizations and working groups, including at government level. So the government itself has invested, fair play to it, through the research and innovation funds that it puts out. Millions of pounds are going into looking at how we can design out waste, prevent waste, and looking at specific initiatives that can do that. CIWM has expert groups and plugs into other industry groups working across the sectors with the pack techers, the retailers, and others to work out how we can best design out waste in the first place. And there are lots of examples where things are happening. So Carlsberg is a classic example I saw the other day, where they've gone from, they used to have the plastic rings on top of a 4-pack of beer. Now they have just a little bit of glue that sticks the beer cans together. So they've reduced that plastic waste entirely. So there are lots of initiatives going on. Again, I often use the example is, when I started in the sector, which was a considerable number of years ago, there was almost no contact between retailers, packaging technology experts, and marketeers and the waste sector. So we were expected to just pick stuff up at the end of the line, whereas now there are so many working groups that it's hard to pick out which of them are ahead and which of them are leading. So there is lots of innovation going on, and we are making good progress in some levels.
The next question, it's a bit of a bugbear of mine, and this could be a bottomless pit for an answer. Because it's the most, I think one of the industries that we always forget about is one of the most polluting in the world, is will the extended producer responsibility scope apply to the fashion industry?
Mm-hmm.
Why designer goods? Why the price? What is going on? I got my, I have
Yeah,
an issue with it, Dan.
yeah. And the fashion industry itself. So while I agree with you, fast fashion especially, and especially over the last 10, 15, 20 years, has been responsible for a huge amount of that throwaway culture and some of the challenging materials that come onto the market, if you like, especially to recycle, because what used to be easily recyclable in the rag trade, with cheap polymer based fabrics, it's much more difficult. However, there are lots of initiatives that are also happening within the fashion sector and between the fashion and other sectors to look at how they can, again, begin to build in recyclability and longevity and recycle the materials that are on there. And in terms of will EPR apply to it, the intention of EPR is that it's introduced into, to start with, the what we'd understand as standard packaging materials, but the regime and the mechanics are being set up so it can be extended to other materials, so, and other specific materials. So mattresses, again, is a challenge to the waste sector for years because they're almost impossible to tear apart and get anything useful out of. But that's one of the first materials or sectors that it will be aimed at. The waste electronics, the domestic small WEEE scheme, that is being consulted on now. Fashion, I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't come next or will. So the scheme is designed to apply to a whole range of different materials.
And a question, I think it's a question maybe a bit pick up from the previous ones. Just give me a headline answer to this, because I think we could go quite deep. Does the CIWM coordinate with for example, the Energy Institute with regard to process safety matters, given the complexity of and hazard associated with energy from waste plants? So for process safety,
Yeah.
not sure people know what that is, but we're talking about a multidisciplinary approach to planning integrated processing systems, manufacturing systems. So I think we're asking, how does CIW and its members bring energy management and carbon reduction into the decision-making process of organizations? I think,
Yeah.
Tim, what we're trying to say to make it relevant.
So the honest answer is, do we liaise with the Energy Institute? Is I don't know. However, I know that there is lots of focus, both not not just in CIWM, but ESA especially, which is the trade body, so the operating, the members that operate the facilities at ground level, there is a huge focus on health and safety. As I mentioned, the WISH forum, which is the Waste Industry Safety and Health Forum, I know taps into and gets expertise from other sectors. So I would hope those process safety principles and learnings are included in what the WISH forum does. And it's certainly aimed at learning best practice from other relevant sectors and has been for the past 10, 15 years.
Okay. Will the extended producer responsibility scope, so we've done that. Why, challenge, what are your thoughts on laughing gas and laughing gas canisters rather?
What are my thoughts on it? Well, so they're intensely irritating the amount, from a waste perspective, this is intensely irritating the numbers of them you see lying around, or did. As I understand it, government is changing legislation to make the sale of the small canisters that seem to be popular by kids in parks more difficult to get hold of. From a waste, so it's a street cleansing problem and an environmental quality problem. However, the big challenge for our sector is the larger canisters, which are often used presumably for parties as well as other medical uses. When they get into the waste stream, they're more of a problem because you have large pressurized canisters, and if that gets into an energy from waste combustion chamber, it can blow a hole in the side of the refractory unit. So there is a challenge in terms of how we manage them, how we spot them, how we get them out of the waste stream to recycle them where we can, and certainly not let them become a safety issue.
Got a few questions here because time, we've got the last 6 minutes past, we've got about 7 minutes to go. Talking about innovations, what about making fuel from plastic waste? What are your thoughts on using it as a source of fuel?
So that chemical recycling is a thing. It is it being actively not only pursued and researched, but operated at the moment. So I know companies like Viridor, for example, they have recently acquired a chemical recycling operation in Europe, where they are looking to learn and bring back the technology and the learnings into the UK and across Europe. Suez really active in looking at a whole range of operational and research plants as to how we can use polymers, break them down to their plastics, break them down to their constituent polymers, and as long as it doesn't create a sludge which is then burned as a fuel, which is the same fossil fuel as you started with, then it is a quite promising technology. The whole sector is probably yet to be convinced as to whether it's operable and economic at scale, but it's certainly an operational theme that is being pursued and invested in.
Okay, as the industry moves towards automated processes, change management is massive. Sharing and learning is essential, but commercial sensitivity and trade secrets is still a concern for operators in the industry. Do you feel there is a need to push for more shared learning regarding process changes in the industry?
Almost certainly, yes. What is the answer to that, and how do we overcome those competitive drives and protectionism? Sensitivities is the best way of describing it. Is hard because in our sector, like any other, everybody's trying to gain an edge. Everybody is trying to find an opportunity and to make it their own, and therefore that shared learning is quite difficult. However, CIWM, ESA, WISH, and some of those forums works on that and works out how we can best take learnings and share them across the sector as soon as technologies and processes become viable at scale.
Okay. We mentioned the fashion industry. Somebody else has said, actually, are there any initiatives regarding the flooring industry and the disposal of carpets?
Yes, there are. I can't remember the name of the firm, but when I was back in 4 or 5 years ago, pre-COVID times, I sat on the Green Alliance's Circular Economy Task Force, and there was a company that was a member of them that specialized in recycling carpets of all sorts and producing new flooring tiles and other floor coverings that were made themselves of recycled materials and recyclable going forward. So there are some specialisms, a bit like mattresses. Traditionally, it was a thing that was never really thought about. Industrial carpeting, especially, excuse the pun, but rolled out on in massive volumes, and the recycling of it just was an afterthought. Whereas now there are companies looking to take competitive advantage out of recycling them and producing more sustainable products in the first place. So progress arguably slow, arguably still a long way to go, but there are some specialists that are driving it.
Someone's put up in the chat carpetrecyclinguk.com. So there we go.
That will be one to check. Yeah, that's not the firm that was involved in the task force, but I'm sure that will give you a start of a 10. That's great.
There we go. For all of you, all who are in the room, please remember, don't use my friend Google to start with, and just Alistair up in Scotland. Nice. Thank you for joining us, Alistair, as well. What are your thoughts on how we address the looming staff shortages as our aging workforce are due to retire soon? And how do we compete against other sectors who have similar issues?
Yeah, so massive challenge. So I don't know, you mentioned you'd had a couple of presidents present to your organization. I don't know if one of them was Adam Reed, but Adam, who works at Suez, his presidential report was looking at green skills and what we need to do exactly that. We do have an aging workforce. We have challenges with diversity in our workforce as well. So there is a whole range of initiatives and activities, and we're working with government as part of their Green Skills Task Force to work out how we can attract a new, young, and hopefully diverse workforce into the sector. With the drive towards a circular economy and more recycling, I hope, and I think there is evidence that it makes the sector more attractive than the waste sector of old, because the amount and the variety and range of opportunities and activities that we're now seeking, the skills we're now seeking, hopefully will attract that younger generation of people who want to produce renewable energy, who want to recycle more, who want to drive new technology and innovation in the circular economy. But still a massive challenge. Sorry, we're not being complacent on it, because there's a long way to go.
And my final question, because there was a bit of a dismissive comment in the chat about all this green economy is about shutting down the economy. You probably heard that, the naysayers out there. But irrespective of that, whether you believe it or not, and the economic challenges and how we get rid of oil, because talking to people, my students who come from the Middle East, sort of them actually look at it as we're using oil to find our way out of oil. Yeah, and I thought that was an interesting concept for students who've come from the Gulf states. But my thought is, as a concept, that we live in a finite world. And because of that theory of a finite world, someone somewhere's got to decide, and finite either by internal politics, external politics, geopolitics, or war. We have to be able to be smarter with what we do, smarter how we look after things. And this should be a cultural thing, because we want to actually be smarter with things. Because in the Second World War, they were melting down pots and pans to make submarines, weren't they?
Yeah.
It's this whole concept about we think the world is finite. So this is about embedding this in our thinking going forward.
It has to be, and as a looking at the time, as a closing thought, that's where the CIWM, Chartered Institution of Waste Management, there is an ongoing debate about even our name, whether our name reflects what we want to be doing. And as I mentioned, we have just taken on the Circular Economy Institute and the Circular Economy Club, global institutions that are driving towards greater resource efficiency. But for waste, read resources. That's what we handle. Whether they're recoverable or not, in what form they're in, they are still resources, many of them finite, and therefore to be continuing to put aluminium into the ground or not to recover the plastics that you've got out the made out of oil in the first place doesn't make any sense. And we also there is a growing understanding of nature-based solutions and our reliance on nature-based solutions across the piece. So the economics of it will out in the end. Over the next 10-20 years, the economics will begin to become clear, and if we carry on doing things that damage the systems we all rely on, then the cost of that will get higher and higher, whereas we can and we will and we need to find better ways of doing it and making all this stuff economic as we drive towards net zero and the world beyond waste, which is our purpose.
Dan, many thanks indeed for joining us today. As ever, the discussion is always what makes these things work. It is that conversation. And I thank all the delegates in the room who've answered their questions. Some late ones have come in. Alas, time has beaten us. At this point, I'm going to wish you, Dan, a great year, or great end to your year as president. I hope there's some changes. I hope you can initiate some change. I hope the conversation about resources and sustainability going into your tight liver organisation, whatever, you get some great engagement with your members. Liam, I wish you all the best for the next 3 years as chair of the EWMG. And to everybody else, I wish you the best of the day. Thank you, everybody, for organising today. And we'll see you next time, whenever it is. Take care.
Thank you.
Enjoyed everybody.